Hello and welcome to another game creation organization tutorial. My name is Tyler and I am going to be discussing with you or introducing you to Blender's user interface. We use Blender for 3D modeling and animation in Unity, and it's a pretty awesome piece of software. This was discussed at our last meeting at the time of recording this video, but that presentation ended up going very, very long, and as you might be able to tell from my voice, I'm trying to go very, very quickly and save you some time with this tutorial. So, tangents and other trigonometry aside, let's begin. First thing we need to do is download Blender, and you can go to www.blender.org and hit this. It takes you to this page where you can hit download Blender. The current version right now is 2.77a. You just click that, and it takes you to this page. This is a USA version for 64-bit, which is for everyone who is at GCO. This is what you will want to use, unless you're on a Mac or Linux. Then you just get your appropriate version. It's not a difficult install. You just click this, and it just asks you if you want to save a file, and you just go ahead and save it, whatever. Download, install. You guys know the drill for that. Pretty simple. And yeah. So, once that's done, we want to open Blender, and we'll get greeted with this screen. First thing you need to do is click anywhere on the screen, like that. And ta-da! It goes away, and we see everything. So, up here at the top, we have our options: File, Render, Window, Help. Help can take you to Manual, which takes you to this awesome website right here. And this is pretty up to date. They've been keeping Blender's manual pretty up to date lately. This used to not be the case, but right now Blender has just been getting more and more awesome. In the File section, we have a few options, such as being able to open and close files, save files, link and append, which allows us to merge multiple files and objects together. This can be useful for animated things as well as merging worlds, although some of that stuff can also be done in Unity. And then there's import-export. Import can be useful if you're trying to move things across pieces of software, and export can be useful if you need to export FBX for Unity, although Unity can import blend files directly. Sometimes the FBX works a little better. Sometimes it works worse. First thing we want to do is go to User Preferences, and we're going to go to Input, and we'll make sure that our select is with left click. You can set it deselect with right, which is the default. Right now I have it selected to left, but yeah, Blender just, it does things. There is a rationale as to why it is normally select with right click. However, the workflow that I tend to use does not make use of that advantage, and instead just becomes very confusing. So I just set select with left. The next thing we need to do is we want to go to add-ons, and you do not need to have all of these add-ons enabled, but 3D View 3D Navigation. So if you go here, click 3D View 3D Navigation, I highly recommend this, especially if you do not have a numpad on your keyboard. This makes it a bit easier to get into certain views, although I still highly recommend having a numpad on your keyboard. It'll save you a bunch of time. The next thing that the import-export RS3DS is important, import-export FBX. There's some AutoCAD import-exports. Most of these are import-exports. And for the most part, I believe that it is it. Just the 3D navigation is the one that you'll want to enable, and it is still useful even if you have a numpad, because it's going to allow us to do some interesting things very easily. With that said, there's many more things that you can customize here. You can set themes, colors for all these different tools, but that's something that you can play with. So the way Blender works is it has each of these like little windows, and at what's actually the bottom of every window is what we call a header. A little counterintuitive, but whatever. And this right here is actually a window. If I drag this down, you can see it's got like a console that can give like error messages and stuff. And if I drag that back up, that's an easy way to do it. But anyways, so every window can be changed using the selection screen right here. You can change it to whatever you want. And at the bottom left and top right of every window, we have these little bars, and that allows us to either create or destroy windows. So right now I'm going to drag this up a little bit, and let's say I've got like this timeline right here. Let's say I'm going to animate and I want a dope sheet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this down like that, and that creates a new window. Now let's say I don't like having that window. I want to get rid of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this top corner up, and you see that arrow appears like that, and it destroys it. Keep in mind, I cannot destroy these windows because they are not like perfectly aligned. I have to kind of match things up appropriately in order to do that. But I'm going to drag this down here, and what I typically do is switch this to dope sheet and set that to action editor. That's typically my default view when I am getting ready to animate things. However, for this tutorial we're going to be modeling, so I'm going to get rid of that and drag that down so we have more of our space here. Over here we have our what we call the outliner, and what this allows us to do is select different objects. So as I click one, we see like this camera thing is selected. Now I select this, cube is selected, and here I've got the lamp selected. So as I can see, I can switch those. Don't worry about the world or render layers, that's nothing we really use when working to get ready for Unity. Over here we have options for different things. This one is called a render. We rarely use that, if ever, for Unity stuff. We have the world, which you can customize if you want to change background color while like, editing and stuff. We have our object selection, so if I go here, between different objects we see that we have different menus that pop up. This one is universal to all of them, but the options down here change as I select different things. So most of the time we're just going to be working with these mesh objects, which look like this. We don't really work with lamps or cameras too often. Next we have constraints, and this just allows us to basically kind of limit things if we're doing animation and stuff, which can be useful. We have modifiers, which allow us to use very smart editing tools, so we can have kind of the computer generate mathematically some modifications that we want to apply to our object that are too advanced to try and do point by point. We have data, which we really don't use much. We have materials, which is useful. By the way, you can click middle mouse to drag this if you need to. Really what I should be doing is dragging this window out just a little bit. We have materials, we'll actually be using that quite a bit. Textures, this only applies if you are using Blender render. Most of the time I'm usually setting things up in cycles simply because it makes it a lot easier for me to apply kind of like advanced shader previews if I want to try and create something custom in Unity. And it just looks better, and I can then use any animation poses or whatever and render that out for kind of like promotional art and such. And then of course our little textures tab like becomes way less meaningful under cycles. And I personally always just use cycles for my stuff, but that's because I'm also do CGI stuff. So with that all kind of out of the way, we'll be messing with that later. Down here we have our timeline window, which is useful for animation. It's not going to really do it as much good for modeling at all, so since this is a modeling tutorial, we can get rid of that. And lastly, we have our main 3D view. And so, first thing we want to do is we want to press T, and this happens. And what we notice is that it kind of hides our kind of tool shelf, is what it calls. And the other one that you can press, I believe, is N. And this is our property shelf, which has a bunch of interesting things like our location, rotation, scale, dimensions, and it even has some useful stuff, such as display. We can toggle a quad view like that, which can be useful in some cases, but probably isn't going to be useful too much for modeling. So we're going to hide that. And the other one that can be useful is background images. I'll be doing that in a later tutorial, but you can easily set up your background images for references. So, Blender is actually a very intuitive interface, but most people don't really understand the interface right away because when they look at tutorials, all they see is people describing keyboard shortcuts, and that's because Blender's keyboard shortcuts and hotkeys are incredibly intuitive and make your workflow significantly faster. However, all of the features that you are looking for when editing are usually right down here under View, Select, Add, and Object, especially like the object, and this can change, and this option right here changes depending on what we're working with, but they show you for all of these different settings, all of them have a keyboard shortcut. So if you're ever looking for a feature or anything, odds are you can just find it right down here until you remember the shortcut. For this one, I think it's Control A can actually bring up like this set of properties right here. But it's just, otherwise it's just all the keyboard shortcuts are here. For example, transform, GRS. We're going to be using that quite a bit in Blender. But before we get to that, main things we want to go through is, next to this we have our mode. Main two modes that we're going to be working with are object mode and edit mode. There is a sculpt mode, and you are welcome to use it. We do have a workflow that can basically use sculpting and convert that high poly mesh into a low poly mesh with normals baked into it. It's a very powerful workflow that I do believe is actually used quite often in like AAA titles and such. But for this tutorial, we won't really be using that. I'm not very good at sculpting personally. Actually, modeling isn't necessarily my strong suit, but I've worked with Blender enough to be able to do some basic things. Next, we have our shading view. We can switch to wireframe to get a wireframe of our cube. We can do solid, which just does basic solid shading. And the other useful one is material, which will actually show colors and kind of what things are supposed to look like. And lastly, we have rendered, which actually gives you a preview of the rendering. I'm going to switch back to solid because we don't really have any materials or anything set up. The other thing, before I forget about it, under File, User Preferences, under Editing, there is a Control-Z option for editing, but the number of undos you can do is limited. So you can either memory limit your undos or do it by steps, and if you've got a lot of RAM in your system, or this is like or if you're running on like a beefier computer, like your gaming rig or something, generally you want to increase this number higher than what it is normally set at. I believe my computer, when I installed Blender, defaulted to 32, and I increased it to 64, just in the case that I made more mistakes than I really wanted to. It's just a safety. Coming back here, so we have our different shading views. This can basically act as our mode of rotation and scaling. And this I just pulled into Walmart. Please disregard that. The next thing we have is basically our arrows, like this stuff. And personally, I just completely disable them by clicking these 3 axes right here, and I just disable that because most of the time they get in the way. Here we have something called layers, and if we click on one, it switches us to a different layer, and that can be really useful for organizing your work and hiding things that you don't want to see. We have a snapping tool, which can be useful on some occasions and sometimes not very useful, and there's different snapping modes that we can set up to, so we can snap from one object to another, or snap in increments, and there's plenty of ways that we can set that up. And lastly, we have our rendering stuff, which I don't really use. So, last thing we need to do is we need to actually get comfortable with the operations we can do in this 3D viewport. If you've got a numpad, you'll want to press the 1 key, and you'll notice that you go into front view. You can also get to this by going to navigation and clicking front view. So if we click back front, if we press the 3 key, we get to a side view. If we press the 7 key, we go to top view. And if we press the 9 key, we do the opposite of the view we are currently in. So I just went down to bottom view. I press 1, press 9, now I'm in back. And it even says right up here that we're in back. So it's pretty intuitive. I go to right view, and I press this, now I'm in left view. And the last one is 5. If I press that, I now go into orthographic mode. So some of you may know of my concept art presentation, where I have orthographic view and perspective view, and how orthographic view was very good for 3D modeling, and how perspective view was good for viewing and seeing how things would be rendered in game. Perspective view has a sense of depth, orthographic does not, which means it is independent of how much you are zoomed in, whereas perspective view, depending on how far you are zoomed in, the way lines appear different, and we can see we kind of have this slope here, but as we go here, that this is what the slope used to be, now it's more like that on that cube side. So it's an interesting way of projecting 3D onto 2D. And as you can see, these lines are now like perfectly parallel. They still look kind of deformed, but that could just be an optical illusion. Anyways, I'm going to go back to front view orthographic, which is where I am working most of the time. We also have our 4, 6, 8, and 2 keys, which do this. I'm pressing the 4 key right now, and if I start pressing the 6 key, it happens. If I press the 8 key, that happens. If I press the 2 key, that happens. If I go back, press 6 a couple of times. I'm curious what happens if I press 9. It goes 180 degrees, so now you know. And of course you can switch that perspective orthographic, and you could even select view camera, which the shortcut key is numpad 0. Like that. Pretty awesome. So you can set kind of like a custom save view with the camera. So, some main operations to know about. First is, let's say we want to move this cube somewhere. So what we could do is we could go to object, and since we want to move it, that's kind of a transform on the object. And hey, grab, move. Keyboard shortcut is G. So if I press G, I move it around. If I click or press enter, it locks it in there. I'm going to control Z to get out of it. If I grab and I move it around, I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I can either press escape, or I can right click and it automatically resets. The next keyboard shortcut is R for rotate, and it automatically rotates based on the view you are in. So if I rotate right here and then I rotate, it rotates based on that. So it's always best, a good practice is to make sure that you're rotating either in like a front or side view, or we can lock axes of rotation. I'll get to that in a second. But last one is scaling, and this can be interesting. However, I rarely suggest doing this in object mode. For animation, mostly you just want to do this doing so you'll have to do something called applying transforms. It's a major pitfall with Blender, but it's intuitive as to why it needs to be done when you look at the coding behind this and how it talks to Unity. So we got G, R, and S. G for grab, R for rotate, and S for scale. You can also lock axes. If I press grab and I press X, I'm now locked to the X axis. So even though my mouse is kind of moving up and down, it's sticking to that axis. In the same way, I can do it with GZ to go vertically up and down. And in Blender, Y is forward and backward. So if I go to side view, you can see GY can go back and forth like that. And I can do this at any angle. So if I go right here and I do GX, it still stays to that same axis. GY and GZ. I can also rotate along a certain axis. So if I rotate along X, you can see it rotates along that axis. Rotate around Y, and rotate around Z. Typically I find the rotations around X and Z to be particularly useful. But of course, being in side view and rotating is the same as rotating around X. And being in top view and rotating is the same as being rotating around Z. And same goes for front view and Y. What else is there? Oh, right. So let's say we kind of have this 2x2 cube right here. And let's say I want to move this over 2 spots. So I've got this cube right here, and I want to move it over right here. What I can actually do is I can press G, X, 2. It automatically jumps over to that spot. I hit enter. And there it is. Perfectly. Control Z. Let's say I wanted to rotate it so it looks more like a diamond. I can do rotate 45, and now it's a diamond. I could also do rotate minus 30, and you can see that it actually takes negative signs into account. In the same way, grab Y, nope, escape to undo that, grab C, negative 3, and it drops down there. So it's pretty intuitive in that regard. And scaling can work the same way. We can scale to a particular axis, so if I scale X, you'll notice it only scales along the X-axis. I scale Z, you can see it scales the Z axis. So that can be pretty useful as well. I can also even lock one axis and alter the other two. So if I do grab, Shift Y, you can see I've now locked it along the XY plane. And while it's kind of hard to see, you can kind of see that no matter where I move it around, that blue line is gonna go right through the cube, and the red line is gonna go right through the middle of the cube, because that's where it is locked into. I can't make it go out the side of the cube at all, or out like the front and back of the cube. It just doesn't work that way, because it's locked to those axes. Hopefully you were able to see that. Going back to front view here. And let's say I don't like this cube, because I'm really annoyed with this cube. So with this cube selected, I can unselect it by pressing A, and that basically unselects everything. If I press A again, it selects all of my objects in view. So if I press A again, I'm going to select this cube like that, and I don't like it, so I'm going to delete it. I press the delete key, and it asks if I want to delete, and I can press enter to delete it. So let's say now we want to add an object. I can go to add mesh, and this time we're going to add a cylinder. So now we got a cylinder. I can even adjust the number of divisions on the cylinder. As soon as I add it, I can bring this down, or what I can do is I can click and I can kind of drag across and bring it down to, say, 9. That looks kind of cool. I can even adjust the radius and use these to make it nice. And another way I can even do this is to, let's say for the depth, I can type in a number, 5, and hit enter, and now we've got 5. Pretty cool. So I'm going to delete that because I don't like it, and I'm going to add back my cube. Now, bit of a pitfall is that if you accidentally right click somewhere, let's say we delete that cube, and now we add our cube, it got added way over there. That can be really annoying because we want everything to be in our center, the origin, where all of our axes meet. So, a way to fix that is to hit cursor to center, and that resets it to the origin. That's what's very useful with this navigation pane. We can also go to select, or no, I forget. Anyways, there's a reason why I have this navigation panel, and almost all the time it's because of that cursor to center or cursor to selected. Because I can't even find where that is. So, we got our cube back, and we want to go, and we want to actually be able to edit the vertices and faces and edges of this cube. To do that, we need to go into edit mode. Now what edit mode does is it prevents us from really editing other objects in the scene. It just brings us into a focus mode of actually being able to edit all the data within the object. And this is where we're going to be doing most of our modeling, is in edit mode for a single object. If I zoom in here a little bit. To get in and out of edit mode, another keyboard shortcut is tab. Now we're in object mode, now we're in edit mode. Object mode, edit mode. So, in edit mode, we have these options, which are still the same, but now we have this right here, and this is called our selection mode. Right now, we are in vertex select mode. And if we switch to here, you notice that those little points on the corner disappeared. We got points on the corner, now we got no points on the corner, because now we're in edge select mode. And if we click here, we have face select mode. It's a little hard to see right now. If I rotate over here, you can see that there are now dots on the faces. And right here, this basically allows us to select things behind. So I can kind of select that, or I can select that. Most of the time I have this off, and I just kind of rotate around my scene, using that to get to the selections I want. If I press A, nothing is selected. If I press A, now everything is selected. everything is selected. I'm going to go back into vertex mode, and I'm going to select A to deselect everything. I'm going to select this vertex. If I hit G, I can now grab it and move this vertex around. Notice it did not move the vertex behind. And notice that because I was in front view, it kept things locked to this XY plane. Very similar to rotate. So if I go to here and I start grabbing things around, now I'm moving things in my custom camera angle axes. Like that. You can kind of see the angle that my camera was set in because of that. Go here, and I press Alt-G. Oh no, Alt-G doesn't work here. So, I'm just going to Control-Z to get out of that. Let me tab out here. That was something I did forget. So let's say we're in object mode, and we move our cube way over here, and we're like, oh shoot, I want that back to where it was before. In object mode, you can hit Alt-G, and it resets. Same thing for rotate. Alt-R resets. And even scale. Alt-S resets. And yeah. In edit mode, you unfortunately lose some of these abilities, which kind of makes sense, given the way this edit mode works with the actual vertices and such. You can't really rotate a single vertex or scale it, at least in the rotate and scale modes that we have set. However, if I select multiple vertices, which one way to do that is to hold down Shift and click. This works like control clicked in like your normal like Windows operating system if you want to select multiple things. It does not do chain select like shift click works in other programs. It just selects one point, and shift clicking like that deselects. But if I select this, and then I select this, and now if I rotate, it rotates around the middle point, the midpoint between them. If I add another vertex and rotate, kind of get a rotation around, and you can see where it kind of like spazzes out a bit, and that's because it's rotating. I'm kind of right in that near that spot where it's rotating around. Just gonna hit escape, and if I hit scale, I can scale things out from that point, from that, and that can be pretty useful. I can do similar things with edges. However, with edges, I can very easily just rotate an edge and scale an edge. But I can also rotate multiple edges or scale them. And of course, when you select multiple, you can kind of grab them. Kind of fun to play with. And faces, similar story. Easy to rotate, easy to scale. And all of these things can be done in every mode. I can even do my grab X do and kind of drag that over, and now I've got like this slanted thing. I'm gonna do that, and that brings us to kind of all of our basic operations in our two modes. So the next set of operations are a little bit more advanced. Let's say we want to kind of turn this into a house. Yeah, how about a house? And let's say for our house, we just want a square block. Let's say we've got like this mastermind texture artist who's going to draw all the windows and doors and everything. He just wants an incredibly low poly model in which we're going to have a block, and then it's kind of a triangle block roof. So we can't really do that right here because we need the square block, but we need to add more points. To do that, it's like we need to extrude from this face upward. So to do that, we need to go to Mesh. And there's a couple of things we could do. We could try and add another cube to give us more points. If I grab that out of the way, we can see that we have two cubes, but they're technically the same object. If I tab out and go into object mode, and I select one, both get selected and moved around. Kind of undo to get out of that. So what we want to do is we really want to kind of expand from this point. So if we go to Mesh, we're looking for help us. And at first it seems like it's kind of hard to find something. But if we go to Tools, we can see that there's this Extrude. An Extrude region. And we can see that the shortcut is the E key. And that makes sense. So if I hit E, I can now kind of extrude this shape along the normals. I'm going to hit escape to undo that. It seems like by hitting escape, I still created a polygon, so I'm going to do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that to get back to here. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh shoot, I accidentally deleted that interface. Well, to fix that, what we're going to do is we're going to select these points. And selecting these points one by one is tedious. So what if we can box select them? If we go to select, you can see border select or box select is a B key, and we got circle select for C key. If I hit B, and I go like this, I've now selected all of those vertices. Depending on your mode, whether this is hidden or not, may or may not allow you to select certain vertices. So for example, if I'm in front view and I've got no invisible selection enabled, if I do box select like this, and I rotate, these back vertices were never selected. But anyways, what I want to do is I want to box select these vertices, and I'm going to hit fill, or F for fill, and that automatically fills in the cube. So we're back to our normal cube. So this time I'm going to go into this view, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this. I'm going to extrude and hit X. You'll notice that I'm now extruding along the X-axis. It's kind of hard to see. If I do grab Z now, go up, you can kind of see that the way I extruded was along a different axis. So I have that full control as if I was. It's essentially what it's doing is it's creating all of this geometry right over the top of the originals, and then automatically going into grab mode. And that can make things easy to remember how that gets done. Okay, and now we've got the original selection again. So to actually make our house, what I want to do is I want to extrude upwards by 1 in the Z direction, so I press Z like that, and I hit enter. And next, I realize that I accidentally lost my middle face, but fortunately all these vertices are selected, so I'm just going to hit F for fill. So, next I want to collapse these vertices. So I'm going to select this one, I'm going to select this one, and I am going to hit Alt-M. And this is called merge, and I can make it merge at the first vertex I selected, at the last I selected. At the cursor, I can kind of collapse them, which is an advanced way of merging, or I can do at center. In this case, I want them to merge at the center, like that. And if I do the same thing for these other two, hit Alt-M at center, now I have my little house shed thing. Very, very low poly. Last thing I want to do is I want to select everything. I want to grab it up by 1 in the Z-axis and place it so that everything is on the origin. Because now the center point for my object is still at the origin, but everything is on top of it, so I can very easily, so I'm basically placing this on where it sits on the ground, the center of where it sits on the ground, which can be very useful. There's a couple other advanced things that we can do that you might see in other tutorials. One of them is I hit A, and I go into straight edge select mode, and I control and click that. You'll notice that that acts like your shift click select in most other programs. Why that is backwards in Blender, I do not know. But that's just the way it is. I think part of it has to do with the fact that the shift key is bigger on keyboards, so and you're kind of using the shift key a lot, so that's my guess. Like, you use the shift key a lot in 3D. That's another thing, is if you select all of, say, the vertices or edges of like a face automatically gets selected, and the same applies for text mode. You select those, the edge is automatically selected. If I switch to M mode, you see that edge is selected. You might see how when I select a vertex, the lines kind of like fade out. On some computers, I've seen it where the lines just don't fade out, they just go all the way up to the vertex. Don't be alarmed by that. It's not like it's selecting the edge when you're just trying to select the vertex, it's just that that's just the way your computer is drawing the scene on your graphics card. I believe I saw that happen on an Arch Linux machine or something. No, it wasn't Arch Linux. I couldn't even get Blender working on Arch Linux. Alright, tangents aside. So we got our house. Our next advanced feature is Control R, and this creates something that we like to call a loop cut. If I click that right here, I can then even set the position. Right click it to set it right there, back in the center. And so now we have new faces. We've kind of divided our things in half. If I go into edge select mode, and I select this, and I hit Alt Shift and click that, you'll notice that the entire loop is selected. This can be very powerful when we're trying to select things and model things, especially if I did Alt Shift right here. Okay, why didn't that work? Sometimes it doesn't always work, but if I do Alt Shift, okay, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, which is weird. But it can be very powerful if you wanted to select all of like around something to modify it. So in this case, let's say I select all of that because I wanted to do something goofy and I wanted to grab C and kind of give it this little like groove, hump shape, whatever. It became a lot easier to do when I can select everything in the loop. So loops are very powerful and we will be using them a lot. A thing to know about loops is that loops are theoretically not very easy to work with when you have triangles. So this is, it's not very obvious here, but we try to avoid triangles in 3D models as much as possible, especially models that need to be animated. Of course, there are times when you just can't avoid triangles, but basically, even though GPUs always render in triangles, you can break up a rectangle into 2 triangles very easily, which is usually done on Unity's side of things. So we model and animate in quads, so 4 sides. So we have the extrude key. There's a couple other keys that we can do. We have I, which stands for inset, which does something that looks like this. That can be kind of useful. As you can see, it creates almost like embeds more polygons inside. We also have a knife tool. If I press K, and I can kind of draw these lines, and they're very snappy. I can even snap to a vertex, and as soon as I hit enter, I've now created a bunch of these new edges and divided up our polygons. And of course there's some very powerful features, such as if I click here, and let's say I wanted to kind of push this, well, how about I click, yeah, right here, and let's say I kind of wanted to push this outwards a little bit. So a key for this is Alt S, and as you can see, I can kind of push it in or out. This is called the shrink fatten. Shrink fatten, Alt S. There's also a push pull. However, I don't really use that often. I use Alt S a lot, shrink fatten, and it can work with multiple. It can work with multiple vertices as well, and it tends to work on them individually, which can be useful. So you can't always achieve that with normal scaling modes. Another thing that can be very useful is sometimes things get really awkward and weird looking. And so you can select everything, and you can click remove doubles. In my case, I removed 0 vertices. However, let's say I select this, and I decide to extrude it, but I right click it, and now if you notice, when I grab it, it's kind of like overlapping, which is annoying. So if I go here and I click the remove doubles, now if I grab this, I don't do anything. Oh, right, you gotta select everything, and then you hit remove doubles. It says remove 4 vertices. If I go back here and select that, now it's all together again. That can also be useful for finding and solving problems. Well, I hope that this tutorial was useful for understanding the basics to Blender and its keyboard shortcuts and workflows. The next tutorial I'll be doing will actually be covering how to model a weapon. In our case, we're going to be modeling the GCO game sword. Thank you for watching. I hope this was useful, and happy blending!